I've been watching. I've been watching some videos of lectures on, and I'm seeing these, and it just looked so professional. So I was feeling so bad until I realized that they had a cameraman and they, and the whole thing. Where my lectures, in contrast, are. I've got very good. He was just writing on the blackboard. Where my lectures have serious-looking graphics and stuff. So, but at any rate, we will get started in just a moment. We are. Let's see. You have up to I have 2 exercises, 21 to 27. Questions 21.
By next Monday, right?
Yeah, but once due next Monday, right?
Oh yeah.
Some people have been aggressive about getting it in early, but it's due next Monday. And that's okay.
I've got a lot of things
That's
to do.
okay. You get no special credit for getting it early, other than that I do notice that people do, people who do regularly. I had a student last year that turned in all of her work early, and I told her that to make sure that when she's looking for a job to contact me, and I'll tell her potential employer that how well organized she is. So at any rate, as opposed to myself, I'm doing this. I'm not as well organized as her. So, and I'm going to get your, let's see, I'm going to get the, there's some very good lists of, some very good stuff that I got from the list that people gave me. There were some very good companies. In the past when I've done it, I've tended to get companies that were more companies that everybody heard about. But this time I got a lot of companies that you might not have heard about or you don't know very much about. Some of them sounded very interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put those together kind of in a presentation form and get those back to you. So you'll there's about 20 companies, and some of them they say some very interesting companies. And one of the things about these such companies is I think it's definitely the kind of companies you might be working, you could possibly work for, or learn. This is a part of the economy that's really expanding rapidly. I think the opportunities are going to be growing. I know that in general, it sounds like there's a lot of jobs out there. So I know the ratio of offers to jobs is at about like a 40-year high. It certainly is higher than it's ever been since I've been here. So one of the things that's telling me that the global economy is beginning to recover. So with some interesting things going on. Let me get the light off here. I also, well, I did want to mention, I know sometimes I joke, and I was talking about North Korea. If anybody, it is some serious stuff. I know I was making a joke about Kim and all, but certainly I know on a lot of people's mind and my own, it is something that certainly to be concerned. And one of the things I wanted to mention about that is just sometimes in economics, we don't have much to say about things like that. I think they are acting rationally. They have a reason for doing what they're doing. They're not irrational people. They have a reason that's motivating them to behave in the way that they do. But it's a kind of behavior that we really can't say very much about in economics. It's one of the limitations. We can't explain everything. So, sadly, but truly. At any rate, today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about land markets. I'm going to talk about land markets. I'm probably going to also introduce or begin to talk about the topic of the next lecture, which is general equilibrium, which is a very complicated And I know probably for me, it's certainly the most difficult subject to introduce to a class like at this level, because general equilibrium is just kind of mathematically difficult for even economists to really understand. So to try to explain something that's really that complicated at this level is not easy. At any rate, I'll do my best for that. I may get into that, but I'm going to talk today, I'm going to focus on land markets. Now this is one of the topics that I like, because my own specialty is, it's kind of my subspecialty in economics is a field called regional science, and we're interested in the effect of space, primarily interested in the effect of space on economic activity. It's kind of like geographical economics, urban regional economics, but certainly using the tools of economics in order to analyze economic interaction in space. So this is certainly an area that I've done work many years in the real estate industry in Japan. So this is certainly a topic that I'm quite familiar with. And what I'm going to, I'm talking about the input markets of and I've got here household supplying labor, capital, and land to firms. I'm also, in preparing this lecture, and I don't know if everybody, I just sent this out about 10 a.m. this morning, so I don't know if some of you might not have this. I sent something to you last night that I added to that. So if you got my email this morning, then you have the update. If not, then there's some new material that you didn't get this morning. But I'm going to talk about, what I'm going to talk about is also a household demand for land as well. So it's kind of both. I know it talks about firms, but I'm going to also talk about household demand. It's just very difficult to talk about the real estate market or the land market without talking about household demand for real estate as well. And so one of the things is that everybody, and one of the things I learned very quickly when I went into the real estate business is that everyone's a real estate expert. Everybody knows everything about real estate, which actually people know nothing about real estate, but everybody thinks they know a lot about real estate because it's all around them, it's all around us. That turns out not to be the case, but at any rate. But one of the things that I want you to think about, and you probably may not have thought about, is that land is also an input into the production process. And we've seen output of this form, and we're going to add land to that. And I think one of the things you're going to see, and this is in the production function, one of the things I think you're going to see is that it adds a level of complexity that economists tend not to want to deal with. And so most economists and economics doesn't deal with the effect of land and space on economic interaction. So, but at any rate, that is what we're going to consider today. And here I put where N, because we ran out of L's. We got one L, so I put N. I didn't want to use D or A or L, so I used N for land. And that is the gamma, the Greek gamma, so alpha, beta, and gamma. And that is a production function. And for most, really almost every firm, virtually every firm has to have at least some use of land. If you pay rent somewhere in some way, you're using land. And certainly we'll go, one of the things we'll do is we'll go into that and consider that. And what I'm actually going to spend quite a bit of time is focusing on land as an input into the utility function of households as well. And one of the things I'll be talking at least one lecture next semester is cities. In this class will be cities, the effect that cities have, or what cities are as a form of human economic organization, and how important that is. Cities are a very important thing to in economies. Advanced economies tend to have large cities. So that means that the land market is in fact an important part of every advanced economy. So what we're going to think about here is we're going to talk about land as an input into the utility function of households, and we need space in order to live, and the amount of space that we have is a very important part of the quality of our lives. And certainly one of the issues in a city like, when in Japan in general, and in a city like Tokyo in particular, and certainly other cities face. Hong Kong is an example. Their apartments, units can be very small. Many of the units that are available here are very small. So as a result, where people live, the size of the unit that they live in, their commute, all of these things play an important role in their lives, in the satisfaction that we get out of living in the city. Now earlier we introduced a simple utility function that was used to study the trade-off between work time and leisure time, and it looked like this. We had the leisure time, the consumption, the household consumed, they consumed. It was based on this this function, which is a function of the amount of leisure time and the amount of income. The idea being that we need income to buy goods, and we need the leisure time in order to consume, to enjoy our consumption of those goods. So that was the basic model, and we had these constraints. The leisure plus work time is 24. The income is the wage times the amount of hours that we work. So now what we're going to do is we're going to adopt this utility function to take into account the household demand for land. And one of the things we have to think is, well, how do we do that kind of thing? So one of the things what I want to do to accomplish today is to get you to look and see how we take ideas and put them into numbers, put them into some kind of form, so that we can do some type of numerical or analytical analysis on that. And that's an important part of what we do. We collect data where we can get it. We collect data on the real world. We observe the real world in that way. And another way we do is we create models that may explain reality, that may explain the world that we observe. And so what I'm going to do here is go through a basic process to take this model and add the effect of space, the effect of the need for people to occupy space, and that is the space, the size of the unit. In other words, the size of the unit that we live in, because that has an important impact. It's not just that we consume some composite good, we also consume space. And another important factor is where we live. Where we live has an impact because where we live affects the amount of moving around that we have to do to go to our job, to go to school, to go for entertainment, concerts, movies, nightlife, all the other things. So all of the activities that we do, our ability to do those things in the city depends on where we're located. So we're going to take some consideration into that as well. And one of the things we're going to see is that it does add a lot of complexity. It adds a lot of complexity to this problem. We're going to try to do it as simply as we can, but we will see that that adding the effect of space does make the analysis a lot more difficult, which is one of the reasons why most economists don't bother with it very much. At any rate, what we're going to do is we're going to have a model where household utility depends upon the consumption of the composite good C that we had before, and you've worked with this model, so I think you have a good idea of what's going on with this model. You've done some exercise work with it. Then we're going to add the amount of space the household occupies, and that's N for the land, and H for, so it's household land. And what we're going to focus on is not necessarily the amount of land the household owns, but the amount of space that they occupy in their living space. So in doing that, and we're going to add the effect of location, essentially distance from the city center, D, the distance from city center, from the center, and your NH, the size of the space. So it's basically a trade-off, unit size. And one of the things we're going to be doing is we're going to be trading off the location, the size of our unit, with the distance from the center. One of the things that we see in reality is that the better the location, the closer that we get to some central area in general. All you have to do is look in the look in the ads like a Chintai or other type of publications, and you'll see very quickly that when you get in the center, a lot of the spaces are very small, and or the per square meter per month cost is quite high. It can be over 5,000 yen per square meter per month. So that's what we're going to look at here. So we're going to consider that the household needs to purchase and consume its space. And purchase, we mean it could be buying, it could be renting. That either way you're buying, you're paying money for the space, as well as purchase the composite good. So what we're going to say is the amount of space consumed by the household depends upon the share of income the household uses to purchase its space and the price of a unit of space. So we're going to say that's the share of income. So that's some number between 0 and 1, the share. And the share would be the share towards housing, the share towards the composite good. So we're consider that some share of that. And then this PhD, that doesn't mean doctor PhD. That means the price of housing at a distance D, some distance D. So it's distant dependent from the city center. And you can see we divide that so that and the idea being that as we get closer to the city center, the price goes up. So we're going to use some simple function here to describe the price of a unit of housing, like a square meter, some amount of housing, and the total amount of housing is simply the amount of income we devote, the amount of money we spend on housing, divided by the price per unit of housing. It tells us how much housing we have. So that's a simple equation. It's not complicated, but we'll see things get complicated fairly quickly. So I'll try to keep this as simple as possible. As I say, this pH D refers to the price of the unit of space, some distance D from some location, and we'll call that the city center. The larger the value of D, the lower the price of a unit of housing. And a large value, what I mean is the large value of D. In other words, the further you get away from the center, the further you get away, the cheaper a unit of housing. And that's empirically, as I say, it's very easy to see that. Just grab a Chintai or any other publication and just thumb through it or get online, and you'll see very, very quickly that the further out you move, the more the lower per square meter the price of a unit of housing is. So a large value for D, it may represent, say, some suburban location, someplace outside of the 23 wards, whereas a small value for D may represent some location in one of the central wards of the city. It could be Chiodoku or Minato-ku, something like that. So that's a low value, a high value. It could be someplace like Machida, someplace outside of the 23 wards. So we're also going to redefine the household's consumption of the composite goods. I said that we've got the share of housing, of income for housing. We're also going to have a share of income for the composite good, and that's just very simple. The share times the amount of that's the amount of spending. That's the amount of spending, the amount of consumption of the composite per unit of composite good. And you remember, if you recall, we used a price equal to 1, so that we could just ignore the price. But here it matters. The price of housing matters because that changes with the location, whereas typically the price of the goods that we buy don't change very much, whether we live in the 23 wards or outside of the 23 wards. If it's somewhere in the metropolitan area, if we go to a convenience store, for example, or go to a grocery store, things cost pretty much the same, at least for goods other than housing. But housing costs differently depending upon where we're located. So we're going to keep that in mind, but we're going to get that simple. So SC represents the share of income the household uses to purchase the composite good. So remember, the shares of income used to consume the space, and the composite good C sums to 1. It's not very hard to see. It's just 100%. That share plus that share just sums to 100%. Again, that should be quite simple to understand. And so we're going to restate that household utility function that I introduced earlier in this semester as a function of the consumption of the composite good C and of the space. And what we can see here is, in fact, it starts getting a bit complicated. Here now is the revised consumption of the composite good. Looks like this, because the total amount that we spend on C is now the share of income times the income. And we're not spending before we spent all of the income on the composite good, and now we're spending some of that on housing. So this just says that our utility function is a function of our leisure time, our consumption of the good, of the composite good, and our consumption of housing. Now the important thing to remember here is that this is a function of the amount of hours we work. This is a function of, our leisure time. We're going to add a time factor for our distance, because the further that we're away, the more we have to commute to do anything. So the price is lower, but there's a cost. There's a trade-off between the lower cost for housing and perhaps the larger unit that we can have, and the fact that we'll have to travel more. We'll have to spend more time traveling. So that's reflected here. This may look complicated, but when you just slow down, take a few deep breaths, and just look at it, it's actually not very, very complicated. It's not a very complicated figure. And now you can see this is the effect of, this is the preference for leisure. That alpha says how much we value a relative value on leisure, the relative value on labor, and the relative value on housing. How important is housing? Is the size of our unit. This says how important we value our leisure time, how important we value, how much we want to work as opposed to have leisure, and how much space we want to have. So now we're capturing a lot of those. As I said, the time spent in leisure and time spent working. We're adding another time constraint. It's the time spent commuting from the location of the home to the work location. That's the H, C, and D. So they all add up to 24. So now we have a little bit, it's a little bit more complicated. We've added another term. We're considering that. Now we're taking our income. Our income is the same as before. It's just the wage times the number of hours worked. Now, I'm not going to ask you to make calculations. Actually, I said I'm not going to use to make calculations. And then when I did that, then I went and made calculations. So, and I'll explain the work that I did. It was kind of some interesting results. But what I want first to do is I want to see where the ideas, I want you to understand where the ideas that I'm presenting to you are coming from. I want you to understand, to get used to the idea that you take some concepts, and you put them into numbers, you put them into mathematics. And when you put them into mathematics, we're able to then begin to think more disciplined about work. One of the things that I learned, I did a lot of theoretical work, a lot of mathematical work when I did my PhD. And one of the things I really became to appreciate was that in using mathematics, it really helps you to think disciplined. It helps you to think more disciplined. And so you're much more straightforward. You get rid of ideas that don't matter. You focus on the things that are important. So that's one of the things that I'd like you to do and get used to doing and why I'm presenting this kind of approach to you. And hopefully you can follow this discussion and you'll be able to see what I'm trying to accomplish here. So what's very similar with this model, what we talked about earlier, the household had to determine how best to use their time. And that's the most important thing that we have. Time is the most valuable thing we have. And so how do we use our time? How do we use our time? In leisure, that includes raising children, work, or commuting, traveling. And so all of those things are an important part of, and that's where we live. And of course, the commuting is where we choose to live. That affects where we choose to live, and that's our trade-off. So, do we remember that the more time the household spends consuming goods, the more satisfaction they receive, but the less time the household can spend working to earn the money to purchase the goods. That's that trade-off. And that's one of the things to remember is whenever we do something in economics, we're always interested in studying trade-offs. We're always interested in understanding what are we gaining and what are we giving up. Because that's the way it always is. We're always gaining something and we're always giving something up. And we always have to decide what that trade-off is. The more time the household spends commuting, the lower the price of housing. The further out you go, the cheaper your housing is, the bigger your unit you can have. And you can enjoy that. People who live way out, that commute long distances, do so because they prefer, they're happy to have that, especially when you have a situation where you have a salary man and the traditional salary man working in the city and the wife staying at home and he's commuting a long distance. It makes the housing cheaper and she's happy because she's a big house, a bigger unit. So, and that's a trade-off. The less time the household can spend, the more time the household spends commuting, the lower the price of housing, and the more housing the household can purchase, but the less time the household can spend working to earn the money to purchase the housing space, and the less leisure time. So it affects leisure time. So that's the trade-off. And we'll just repeat this utility function here, just to keep this in mind. Just keep on looking at that to understand the effect that's how we value leisure, how we value work, and how we value our housing. So the various values that we put on leisure, work, and housing, and that determines our level of satisfaction. And note, the one thing to remember, these are what happens when we have a multiplicative utility function. that the consumption of goods, the consumption of housing space, and leisure time, these are all complements. We need each one of them in order to enjoy the other. Some of them are more complements than others. In particular, the consumption of goods and the consumption of housing space are complements. Because the more space we have, well, the more goods we can consume. That's certainly, and I haven't explicitly modeled that here, but basically, the reality is that, and especially in a city like Tokyo, one of the reasons why you have a bigger place to live, if you have a bigger place, you can fill it with more junk. And if you've ever, I know one of the things that because most of us live in relatively small apartments, and our apartments are cluttered, are just full of junk. There's just stuff everywhere, And you go and visit somebody, you realize they've cleared everything out, and they've shoved a bunch of junk in the tatami room, and they got the door closed. But really, if you open it up, the stuff would rush out and fill up the apartment. That's what people that kind of pretend that they don't, that they have a neat, tidy house, but the reality is otherwise. But at any rate, that affects us. Our ability to consume goods depends upon the amount of space that we have. But leisure time, consumption of goods and consumption of housing space are also substitutes. We can give up space for more leisure time. We can give up work for more leisure time. We can give up work to some degree for more work hours for housing, because we live further out. We have to commute more. Because if it's cheap enough, then we're happy to commute more to have more space. So we're giving up a little bit of work. So that makes that a substitute. So all of these are also substitutes. And an important remember is that the degree that we can substitute each of these for the other depends upon the elasticity of demand for each of these. The elasticity of demand is affected by our preference. Our preference affects our elasticity for demand. The higher that any one of these, then our demand for it is more inelastic. If one of these is close to 1, we don't have, our demand for it is fairly inelastic. Whereas if these are more equal, then our demand is more, the demand for any one of those is more elastic, and we're willing to trade off one for the other. So one of the things I hope you've learned from the exercises that you've done is to begin to understand that the value of these coefficients, the intensity you did for the factors, when you looked at the factors, that the elasticity between inputs, or here between goods consumed, depends upon how similar the coefficients are. The more similar, the more elastic the cross elasticity of the goods are. So and the more they can be substituted. So all of that's in the equation. A lot of very, very complex ideas. And that's the thing that's really interesting about this. It's really interesting about this is the complex ideas that you're capturing in just an equation. And I can write this down. It'll take me pages to really write down so you understand it, but I can just put it into an equation. And as long as you can grasp that, this is a very compact form of a fairly complex idea. And what's great now that I have it in this form, well, I can generate numbers. And the wonderful thing now is that with Excel, or some other form, but Excel in particular, you just run. Is there an exact form of this? Well, there probably is. Maybe I could probably, if I take my, I might be able to get some kind of exact form for these. But I don't even have to worry about that. I can just run simulations. The thing is that in the past you had to worry, can you get it, is this an exact form? Can you break it down in an analytical form? Now the thing you want to make sure that this satisfies certain conditions so that you know you're getting some unique maximum. You're concerned about that. You're always concerned about that in an equation, a functional form. But here, we're more, at this point, we're just concerned that we can take these and just put them into a data set, like Excel, and just start running simulations. And that's what I did. And the great thing was, I ran effectively thousands of simulations last night. A few thousand simulations, and just, because I got this idea late yesterday, I said, maybe I'll do this. So I put this together. The more I put it together, the more deeper I got into it. So here it is, and so here it is today, and I'm presenting this, basically presenting my findings of the work I did last night to you. And one of the things that's interesting about this is that you get, the reality is that you have very different kinds of people that live in a city. The kinds of people that live in the city. And so what I did was I generated, I'd used the model, possible outcomes, then I searched the results for utility maximizing outcomes given these parameters, given those preferences. So I took the preferences, and then what I got was, what's the equilibrium? I'm sorry, what's the maximizing choice that a person, I just had the same wage, so I didn't worry about wage. And I also, in this one, I just had the share equal. The shares were equal. I just had 50-50. I'm not going to worry about that, because then that's another, then I'd be doing millions of simulations, which you could do. That's the great thing. It's really not that hard. I mean, it only took maybe an hour or so to put this together. I mean, it didn't take, just type it in, copy, paste, change the numbers, boom, boom, boom. And you get, this is the kind of thing that you would have taken months and months and months, even when I was in graduate school. You couldn't do something like this when I was in graduate school. Other thing is also, you may want to consider, if any of you play like simulation games, kind of games you have characters that run around and do different things, they have powers, or, and does anybody play games like that? I can't imagine anybody does. There he is, right, there's one. There's one right there. No. Yeah. Okay, people probably spend, in fact, they're probably afraid to admit how much time they spend playing such games. Now the thing is, where does the idea of these games come from? Well, you've got to make models of behavior. You make some kind of model of behavior, and then you put that into the game. The character, what's behind it is some model that's simulating some behavior, some of activity. Well, it's the same thing here. So if you're interested in playing those games, you might as well get interested in something like this, because it's we're just kind of playing to see. It's the same kind of thing. Or like SimCity. This would be like a SimCity, city simulation to see where various people. But that's the idea. You make a model like this. So you want to go out, learn how to do something like this, learn how to program, and go out and then I'll find out one of you was so inspired from this that they went out and worked for some gaming company, and I found a very happy career doing so. I mean, why not? But so here's the results. That is, and so what this shows, what I did was these are locations. So this is the closest, the one, that's the closest to the city center. And now what I didn't do, I'm assuming that everybody can live somewhere near the city center. I didn't worry about whether they can afford to pay for the space. I'm assuming they can find some space for them at their level of income in order to pay. Now, so here we have, that's the alpha, that is preference for leisure, preference for work, preference for housing size. So this is somebody that just wants to work all the time. They want to work all the time, well, they got to live somewhere, and I guess they got to spend some time in leisure, you know. But basically, all they want to work, so they live at the city center, they make a ton of money, and they're really happy. In this model, they get tons of happiness from, and one of the interesting things is the ones that work the most seem to get the most happiness in this model. So you've got this 20-hour, 22, 20, a little bit lower utility. It's 0.8, 0.7, and in all of these, it's a low preference for space. So what this says is if you live near the city center, you don't really care about having a lot of space. You better not, because it's expensive. That's the point. You don't live in Minato-ku or Chiyoda-ku because you want to have 500 square meters of space. You live there because you want to be near what's happening. You want to be near your job. You want to be near where you go out and play and whatever. So that's this. People with that low, or like people who live in Manhattan, like my daughter who lives in Manhattan. She has a small apartment. She wants to be in Manhattan. So she spends a fortune for housing. Puts it on Airbnb to get some extra money, but she wants to live in the center of the city. So that's it. It's not much of a preference for space, some preference for work. But one of the things we'll see is that there's people that are living there with a high preference for leisure. Now you'll see that this is a 20 hour of leisure, 3 of work. At some point, you're wondering, what does somebody like this, who basically wants to have leisure all the time, where do they live in the center of the city? Well, they might be homeless. You might have somebody that might be describing somebody that's living on the street, but they like living there. They would rather live there than anywhere else. So this is one of the interesting things about this is that. And I realized that what the model shows is that at the city center you have the most diversity of people as well. That you have the most of the different kinds of people who want to work all the time and people who hardly want to work at all, who live there. And you may not have that necessarily a lot in Tokyo. I assure you that in a city like New York, it is. And actually, if anybody's familiar with Osaka, anybody familiar with Osaka? Places like Shinsaibashi. Anybody know Shinsaibashi in Osaka? Places like, that you're talking about down here is definitely, maybe less here, but a place like Osaka has plenty of these kinds of people that live in the city center as well. So, so it does reflect the idea that there's a lot of diversity, a lot of differences in utility, huge differences in the kind of people, the amount of hours that they're willing to work. But the one thing they all have in common is that they don't really care much about the space that they have. So that's these people. Then we go to the next, out a little bit. It's all this. The location all has to do with preference for space. Always has to do with preference for space. The second zone is here. They may have a little preference for. Still a fairly high preference for these ones have a high preference for leisure. We could also get that for work. Here you have the third zone, high preference for work down to a low preference for work, low preference for leisure up to a high preference for leisure. But again, that same level, and again, at least here the most utility, the people that work the most and make the most money. Again, we have the 4th unit, the 5th unit. One of the things that happens when you go out and is that this number goes up. When that number goes up, then the possible range falls. So if you think about it, and think about what happens in the real world. In the real world, I'll go to the next page to do this. In the real world, when you get out in the suburban areas, and think about it, especially if you ride the train on the west side of Tokyo. You're on the Odakyu Sen, you're on lines like that, the what's the other one? Well, Toyoko, any of the Toyokos then, Dan Shofu, Sen. You know, those lines, one of the things you'll notice is that further you get out, the kind of people are all kind of the same. They're much more similar. And the reason is that people that live out there have, they want a lot of space. And they have that tolerance for commuting. So only a certain kind of person with a high tolerance, and because once you're spending a lot of time commuting, a lot of energy commuting, you don't have that much left over for preference either for work or for, you're going to work the amount that you have to work. You're still going to work, you can still work a lot, but the one thing you're giving up, you're probably going to give up a lot of leisure. That's the thing. So the commuting warriors, especially that live out, that live way out, on one of those lines, way out there, they don't spend a lot of they don't get a lot of leisure. They get a little bit of time drinking with their colleagues after work, and then they're on the train for an hour, a couple hours, going and coming. So the thing is, but they're still going to work a lot, or a fair bit. They're still going to work a lot, but they're not going to have much leisure, but they get a lot of space. That's the trade-off. But the point is that people, that's going to be a certain kind of person. So it's limited. And as I say, the interesting thing when I did this is the model, the diversity, the different kinds of people. It's one of the things it suggests is that there's more diversity of people from high to low that live in the center, in a city center, than live out in the suburbs. And this is one of the reasons why. And the point of all this is that these are the kind of insights that you can get on behavior, that you do something like this and you say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And if you observe that in the real world, then you've learned something, and you've learned something about reality. And in this case, we've learned something about the land market and how the land market works for residential. So I'm going to just talk about the basic. This is just a simple line showing the relationship between the city center and the consumption of housing space, holding income constant. And what this shows is that the closer you get to the city, the D, this is further out, closer in. It's just your consumption of housing drops. So it's a downward sloping but backward, downward sloping a relationship there, and that's it. So if you have more of a desire for space, well, you live out here, and if you have less, you live there. Now I'm going to talk about the demand for land from the standpoint of the firm, and you've seen these pictures before, which is fine. One of the great things is I get a chance to reuse the same picture, and mainly because I'm trying to make similar but somewhat different points. And in this case, I'm going to make the point of using the use of land and fitting the use of land into as a factor in the production function. As we said before, this I noted earlier, this Cobb-Douglas production function, which is stated to take into the effect of land, N represents the input of land in the production function. The gamma represents the intensity of land use in the production function. Intensity, that means that if we need more land in order to for the firm to produce, then that value is higher. So let's consider. So we identify the type of firm likely to be found in a particular location based on the values of these above coefficients for labor, capital, and land. So let's consider a firm which requires a lot of land and some modest amount of capital, because, well, if you've got a lot of land, there's only so much capital that you can have, and firm that can operate their business with a small amount of labor. What kind of firm does that? It's right here. It's this wheat farm. That could be easily in Australia as well as in the US, maybe I suppose Russia could, but the point here is that lots of land, so that value is very high. So at the input into this firm's production function, this is high, which makes this very high. A fair amount of capital given that you all the land that you need, but it's capital and very low. This is very low. And so this is in fact, one of the efficiencies of modern agriculture is that we don't need much labor. So what's happened is this alpha for this kind of farm, the alpha is very low. And one of the things here is, remember we talked about substitutability. You can't do much substitution when you hardly need the factor. And here you need very little labor. There's not much substitution that you can make of labor and capital. And in here, the land is very high. The need for land is very high. You can do some capital substitution. And that would also include, say, better seeds, more fertilizer, the use of machinery and other inputs that are non-land in order to increase production. So that's certainly possible, and that's what certainly one of the things that that could fall under capital. As I say, better seeds, better fertilizer, more fertilizer, that type of thing. So as I said here, the value for alpha here is very low. Now let's take the example on the right. This was, if you recall, this is a picture of rice farming in Akita Prefecture, in Akita Ken. The fields are they're much smaller. Now part of that is the way that agriculture is still done, although that's going to change. It's going to your labor is going to get down, but the labor is still is much higher. Your alpha is much higher than it is. The alpha for this, the intensity of labor use is much higher than it is for this. And the use of capital, the beta, is much higher here and much lower here. And probably you're going to be using less land. So you're doing more labor, not as much capital, and less land. Now in the future, what might happen in agriculture and rice farming in this country, in Japan, is that the alpha is going to fall as farmers retire. You're going to use a bit more capital, and the farms are going to get bigger, which means that this gamma gets this function will get bigger. So basically, what that means is that the production function itself is going to change. The technological change, and here, as much the political and demographic changes that are going to take place are going to cause the production function to change. And when the production function changes, then you're going to see the difference, because this is going to begin to look a little bit more, not quite like this, but the fields will get bigger, there'll be more machinery, and there'll be fewer people working the farm. So and you can put those changes into this form. That's the important thing, is that again, we can consider changes and we can write them down and all, but we can put them in a functional form, and that helps us to think clearly about what's going on. So with thinking clearly about it, using this kind of functional form, it also makes it more, you can write about it more clearly. Because if you write about it and you have that in mind, you know exactly what you're saying. You're going to be more precise than somebody who's just vaguely writing about and they don't really have an idea. They don't have a clear idea. So this is a good way just to keep that clear and much more sharp and directed, and to think about what kind of changes, what changes, and when you say that it's changing, well, how do you say it changes? Well, these coefficients are going to change. That's what changes. So I think that's a very important point. Then we want to talk about some other activities. These are mining and manufacturing activities. They require a significant amount of land. This amount of labor is relatively small. So this kind oil, that's steel production plant. This is a steel production plant here. You're talking about mining. That's an open pit mine there. These use not a lot of labor, but a lot of capital. Not so much land. Some land. You need some land. You need some land, a fair amount of capital, a bit of labor, probably more capital than anything else. Even here, you've got to have a lot of capital. In order to do this to the mountainside, that's a lot of digging that's required. And in order to do that efficiently, you need a lot of machinery and that's a lot of capital that's done. But here's the difference. Now we come to the city center, and now we're talking about a different kind of animal here. Now we're talking about values that, let me just write it on the board since that'll keep it in. So QX equals L alpha, K beta, and gamma. Okay. Now you're talking about something like that. Well, maybe you're going to use this is going to be fairly high. This kind of activity here is going to be fairly high. And why should that be fairly high? Well, imagine if this is low. Well, why do you need to have the building? Why do you need to have the buildings here in a high rent? I mean, there are buildings. There are buildings that are just full of machinery. I think like in Shinjuku, you've got that one. What is it? The NTT tower that I think is all just mainly equipment. But most of the time, which seems a bit silly to me, except maybe they couldn't build it anywhere else, or maybe they had some other reason. But most of this, in order to justify the higher price, because there's the higher value of the bid for this land is very high. Well, you better have a lot of people. You better be getting a lot of that use out of it. You need a fair amount of capital. But how much land are you using? Very little. Very incredibly small amounts of land relative to the amount of space that's created. In fact, what's going on here with these kinds of buildings, you're substituting capital for land. So this is a case, city center, that's Midtown Manhattan, Otemachi Marunouchi, Central London, Central Hong Kong, Hong Kong Central, the places like that. You're doing an incredible amount of substitution of capital for land. That's what happens when you're building a high-rise. Some kind of high-rise, you're substituting capital for land and make the use of land very efficient. So this is very small. Your gamma is in that case very small. This is fairly high. This is quite high because you're trying to pack people together. You're trying to get as many people together in as small a space as possible. And why? Because the value of their interaction. And that's what we're talking about, the external economies. There's external economies. You pack as many people as you can into there. You're creating value in the environment because it makes it easy for these people to interact. So I assure you, these kind of environments, having meetings is everybody you just walk to to your next meeting. You don't even need to get into a cab in many places. You just get out and if it's a lot of traffic, you just get out and walk and make sure you get to the meeting anyway. But that's what happens there. High alpha, reasonably high beta as well, because that's capital. There's capital substituting for land, and this is almost zero. the gamma is almost zero here. It's an incredibly productive substitution of capital for land. And the reason is, even though the beta is much higher, you're substituting because it's so valuable. That's the thing. It's that even though these are different and the elasticity of substitution may not be very high, the value of doing that is so high. So the building goes up, and so you get the vertical, three-dimensional use of space and land in this kind of environment. So now we'll want to consider, look at Tokyo, and consider where do people, where's the most valuable land in the center of Tokyo? We're going to look at it, consider where and why, and starting with the office. The most valuable office land is pretty much right in that oval, this oval right here. This is Otemachi here, and it goes up a little bit there. Otemachi is Marunouchi right there. This is the most valuable office space in the Tokyo market. It's right at Tokyo Station. Tokyo Station is right there. So millions of people. You can get multiple millions of people can get in and out every day. Large amounts of people can work. In fact, what's happened in the last 20 years is now this has become a high-rise district. It's becoming high-rise. 20 years ago, the tallest buildings there were maybe 15, 20 stories. That's it. Now they're high. Now they're much higher profile. It looks like much more of a downtown urban center, a central business district than before. So this is very valuable. The highest rents, the highest land values in the office market are there. And it's expanding, and particularly in this direction, expanding east of Tokyo Station. This is traditionally, have traditionally been the main, what we like to call Japan Incorporated companies, your Keiretsu companies, your main banks, that kind of activity. And these were kind of your secondary companies and other industries that were not at the center of the most important companies in Japan. This is spreading now. And part of this, one of the interesting things here is that you may not be aware, but when the city was founded 400 years ago, this was part of the bay. So this was Tokyo Bay here. So this was like tidal flats. So this was underwater, at least part of the day. So it was. So this is all landfill, and so until not long ago, technically it wasn't very feasible to build high-rise buildings on this side. So if you're familiar, if you have any familiarity with this part of the city, you'll know that the much lower. The buildings have been much lower, but now that's changing. And if you've ever, I would suggest, if you're interested in this kind of thing, go to one of these construction sites and watch what they do to build a building here. What you're doing is you're taking, they take these huge pipes that are probably like 5-7 meters wide, at least like here to here, something like that. You concrete and reinforced concrete, and you put it down about 50 meters down. And it goes about 50 meters down, and it doesn't go to bedrock. It's not even to go to bedrock, because there might not even be bedrock here. There might not be bedrock. So what happens, it goes down, as long as you get deep enough, it doesn't have to hit bedrock, it's just going to be firm. They put enough of that in. I've seen that. And I have a friend who works for one of the main Zenecons, and we were sitting and looking when they were building one of these buildings and talking about it. It's real interesting stuff. But, so the buildings now, so the building on top of it is going to be stable. It's even if it's not hitting bedrock. And that's a technology that didn't exist, for this kind of market. So now you could build in an earthquake-prone area like this, these kinds of high-rise buildings. So this is expanding. Huge projects are going to be built here the next 10 years. Huge, massive, actually here, I should have even put here, massive beyond, let's see, where is this is Scotia, my BOJ is right there, it's like right in here too. I should have even put an arrow, right, it's a massive construction. So this is all going to be, this is going to become even more, the city is going to really centralize in turn, it's going to become a very powerful, and the land values are going to go up. This is the core. But where is the most valuable land in Tokyo? It's actually not here. It's pretty close. But it's not the highest values. The highest values are right here, in Ginza. This is Ginza, right here in the retail district. And in fact, the Yonchome Kosaten, that's your highest value. At the Yonchome Kosaten right there, that's your highest. That is the highest values because it's right at the center. It's right at the center. Let's see. This is Showa Dori. That's Showa Dori. There. Yeah. Is that right? No. Is that Showa Dori? That's Showa Dori. Right, so this should be, I actually should make this a little bit big. Well, that's probably the core. But this is Chuo Dori right there. That's Chuo Dori. I should make this a little bit bigger. Maybe a little bit bigger, but not much, but that's pretty close. But that's it. That's the core of the retail, and it's south of here. If you walk up here, the other side, no. You gotta go south, right here, and it's all packed in here. And the number of people, it's just when you're attracting people that want to spend money, spending money and bringing tons of people together to spend money makes the most valuable land. So this is actually more valuable. This land right in this core of the retail district in Ginza is the highest land values in the city and in this country are right in, well there's the Yonchame Kosaten right here. So that's right there. That's the core, the center, right there along Chuo Dori. Right there. That's the highest value. Then we have, in terms of the residential market, the highest land values are right here in the Bancho. Anybody familiar with the Bancho area? If you're familiar with this is west of the palace. This is a very, in the Edo area, this was a lot of daimyos were here, and one of the things I recommend if you haven't done it is go to the highest point in the garden. I think that's about right here, somewhere here. You can walk in there, go to the highest point, and you'll get an understanding exactly why they built this. The palace was built right here. The strategic importance of this location. It's a very unique location because you can get, it's the highest point that you can get close to the water, and behind is a plateau. So what happened was they were able to build the palace, and you can put your friends at your back, put the friends at the back right there, so there's that protection. Of course, and then here there's the river, you could divert it to make all of this. It's perfect, absolutely perfect location. Absolutely fabulous defensive location. If you ever go in, go up there, and you'll see exactly why. There's a very specific reason why that's located right there. But it turns out it's a great location for the city center too. It just so happened it's a great location for the city to be located on. So this is the core. This is old money. This is old money, old, very prestigious neighborhood. If you've ever walked around there, that's the highest residential values in Tokyo. Is right in here. Of course, there's other districts. There's parts of the Roppongi, Akasaka, Hachome is another pretty high, residential areas. They're pretty close. I mean, This is probably the highest though. So that's to tell you, these are the different, in terms of the land market, some of the things that drive land values. Different uses, depends upon the use and the location, but the one thing is they're all around the center here. This is all around the center core of the city. And of course, this is the government. The national government is located right in this area, right there. So, so there that is. That gives you a sense of where the highest land values are, and around it forms the core of the land market in Tokyo. Okay. Now I want to talk about the difference between land and other inputs, because land does have, at least as a location, now you think about it at a single location, that's how I want you to think about this, is that the supply at any one location is relatively fixed. Now, at a single location, if it's a valuable location, we can substitute capital for land, which is what happens when we build multi-story. But the land itself, the dirt, it's relatively fixed. But it's also possible to create land for economic purposes. As we've mentioned, all of like Yaesu, Nihonbashi, Kyobashi was all once underwater. Much of the ward that I live in, Kotoku, was underwater. You go out in the Tokyo Bay area, out where much of the 2020 Olympics are going to be held. That was almost all of that was underwater. In fact, all of that was once part of the bay. All of this, a huge amount of land, of land that's been that's been created in the city over time. Shinagawa Station, you know Shinagawa Station. And that's the old, that's the shoreline. And if you see that, like the hill rises right behind the station there, the shoreline is right there. So if you go there now, and you'll see the shoreline way out there. But that was the shoreline. That was the shoreline there. Was at Shinagawa. So they've created a lot of land. A lot of land's been created. But at any rate, the supply of land at any one location is relatively fixed. We say that the value of land is demand determined. Remember we talked about derived demand? Well, this is the value of land is derived. It's derived from the value of the usage, what people are willing to pay in order to use it. So demand determined means that input or good and fixed supply. Since the input or good is in fixed supply, its price is determined by what buyers are willing to pay for it. Supply is fixed. The supply is fixed, and so the demand curve there, the downward sloping demand curve. I think that should be the supply. I think I want to put. I'm trying to see what I'm doing there. Let me go think about what that is. But this is your downward sloping demand curve, so it's going to pass. Now, the land is not unique in that. For example, a piece of art, a unique painting by a famous painter, also has a supply of just an up and down supply curve. So and of course the difference here is that yes, this is in any one location. You have it's fixed, but of course there's more substitution. You still can substitute. You can get another location nearby. So it's possible to substitute. So it doesn't mean that there's no substitution, but the supply, the price is complete. If the demand curve shifts, it all has to do with the demand curve. For a piece of land, a piece of property, it's just if the demand curve shifts and the price changes. There's going to be no shift in supply. That's the point. And of course, on the other, although you can increase the price of land. Let's say, for example, you build a higher building, and technology allows you to build a higher building. Codes change that you can build a higher building. That also can increase. You're effectively increasing the amount of land at that location. I'm going to close, I think this is the closing this. Yeah. So I am going to talk a little bit. One of the things I've realized is that I think I talk much faster this year. So I've gone through this material a lot faster. So part of it, hopefully this means that you're just understanding it so well that, and also with the video here, that's having such a, I should check and see how many people are actually watching, but, which I haven't done the last few weeks. And I'm laughing, okay. But I know I've been talking a lot faster, and I've gotten through this this material, so what am I going to do? I still have some time, but let me get through this, and then we're going to start talking about general equilibrium. 14 minutes to go. I want to talk about rent, because rent is a very interesting, rent has a specific meaning in economics. Now rent, we think about rent, yachin, what we pay for something. But that's not what, when economists say rent, that's not what we mean. The income, rent is that income an owner of land can receive based purely on the superior quality of the piece of property relative to another property. For example, I buy a piece of land out in the forest. Up in some mountain, and I come to you and I say, well, it's 100 square meters of land. Well, I don't know. The land, 100 square meters of land here costs this much. Well, I want to sell this land to you for that price. Well, you're going to say, are you crazy? And you'll be justified in saying that. Why is property in a forest? On a mountainside worth a lot less than the same size property in the city center? Well, the rent is the difference in the income. That property on a mountainside, basically zero. Nobody's going to pay for that. It's almost worthless. You can cut the wood down, or maybe you can get people that want to hike there, and maybe they'll pay to pitch a tent there. But otherwise, it really doesn't have much value, economic value, where this piece of property, a good location, does. And that's it. It's just the income, the difference is rent. Now, both of them have dirt. Both are dirt. They're both earth. But one is worth more. That difference is rent. And so, just to give that example, I own two pieces of properties A and B. They can be used for exactly the same purpose. Say a new residential building. Let's suppose I consider renting the two properties to a developer who wishes to construct new residential buildings, and that the market price of renting property A is $1 million per month. And we talk about the cash flow. Property A, same size, 5 times more than property B. The maximum amount that let's say the market price of brand new property A is $1 million yen per month. So the developer can earn a profit of $1 million yen a month from renting the market, let's say, from property B. So the maximum amount of price that they're willing to pay to rent out property A would be 9 million yen. Since the developer earned a profit of 1 million per month by paying that amount. So they could earn the same profit by paying 8 million yen, 9 million, right, not 9 million or 1 million. They earn the same profit, so they'd be willing to pay the same amount. And the only difference, they're the same. The difference of 8 million yen in rent is what we call pure rent. That's what rent is. That's pure rent. That is the return to an input production factor in fixed supply relative to that another input with the same amount of fixed supply. So the pure rent between the two properties is 8 million. And that is what, that basically is what rent is. But we also use rent in economics for a number of other things. For example, let's say that you have influence, political influence, and you're able to lobby to get a bill, to get some legislation passed, which gives you a specific economic benefit that no one else has, or some kind of subsidy, some kind of benefit. That's rent. That's a form of rent. You're receiving rent that just purely based on the superior quality, the legislation that benefits you. So the concept of rent goes beyond real estate. It can go into talking about things that can be political or policy oriented. It's whenever somebody gets something purely because of some position or consideration that they have that somebody else doesn't have, that is otherwise no different from them. That otherwise is no different. It's just that one person has more influence. That's also a form of rent. And here, the difference is just the difference in the properties. It can be difference in property. It can be difference in influence. That's also economic rent. So keep that in mind. And in terms of political science, it's certainly something some of you may be interested in that. So that ends the lecture on land markets. As I said, much of this I prepared last night. I haven't said much about it, but I decided, well, I'm going to say more. As I say, I've been talking more quickly this semester, so otherwise I would have run out of things to say. So, and now you got that benefit. So now we're going to go to the final section of the class. It's general equilibrium. General equilibrium is basically we put all of these concepts together. We put supply and demand in input and output markets, everything together. We put all of that together and we look at that as a whole. What we've done until now, we focus on the pieces. And each piece, and we talk about some kind of equilibrium, we're talking about a local equilibrium, or what is called a partial. It's called a partial equilibrium. And now what we're going to talk about is general equilibrium. General equilibrium is when everything clears. All markets clear, everything. Partial equilibrium, we're only focused on one little part of the market, one situation. In general equilibrium, everything fits together. Everything is connected, and all markets, in general equilibrium, supply and demand is equal. And what we say is that markets clear in all markets. So we're looking at everything at the same time. That's what happens in general equilibrium. And it's a very complicated process. And as I say, it's one that is difficult. It's important for you to at least understand the concept, but the reality is that a general equilibrium mathematically is typically very complicated. It's very complicated, at least in normal mathematical models, to achieve a general equilibrium. It's very and one of the things we'll see is even in extremely simple models, things get incredibly complicated incredibly quickly. But at any rate, what we're talking about, general equilibrium, is the condition in which equilibrium prevails simultaneously in all markets in an economy. All markets simultaneously. That means the equilibrium price, where equilibrium is supply equals demand in all input and output markets. So all input and output markets, And one of the things that we're beginning to move towards is the topics of discussion for the second semester of this class, for those that you're going to continue. I know some of you are leaving. You'll be headed off to overseas for your study abroad. But for those of you that are going to be with me next semester, we're going to continue. And one of the things we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about normative economics. We've been talking this semester about positive economics, and that is the study of economic systems without making value judgments about the outcomes. Or at least we say that there's no value judgments. The reality is that that's not really true. Any kind of system that we study has some kind of, there's some kind of value judgment somewhere, but at least what we do here in positive economics is we try to limit that as much as possible. But, and again, it's important to point out that even when we talk about perfect competition, to some degree we are talking about something that there is a value judgment there. Somehow we're implying that that's some kind of nirvana, some kind of perfect system, which it really is not. But that said, there is a bit of a difference. There's still a difference, because in normative economics, the study of economic systems, that we focus on making value judgments. So next semester we're going to spend a lot more time making value judgments. And what we're going to talk about here is kind of a bridge between those. So this is kind of a bridge to what we're going to talk about next semester. Now, efficiency, also as part of that, I want to talk about when economists, we actually have a specific meaning when we talk about efficiency. You say, most times when people think efficiency means you make something using less resources, as that being efficient. But when we talk about efficiency, we're talking about the condition where the economy produces what people want at the least possible cost. So that's efficiency. The economy is most efficient when the economy is making what people want at the least, and producing it at the least possible cost. Now what that means is that you have a situation like that where all the people who produce are the ones who should be using those resources, and that there's no misallocation of resources. So that condition, that's efficient, is an economy where there's no misallocation of resources, and that people can produce what they that those economic producers produce what people want at the lowest possible price, which means in perfect competition they're selling at the lowest possible price. So everybody's getting something at the lowest possible price, and they're getting everything that they want, given the size of the market. So when we talk about efficiency, we can talk about the efficiency of competitive equilibrium. And our assumptions, we've made the major assumptions that we made is that competitive input markets and competitive output markets. So we've talked about competitive equilibrium. What we've talked about is partial equilibrium in a competitive equilibrium market. And so in those markets, and that's in any input market or any output market, that in a competitive equilibrium, its efficiency means that they're competitive in input and output markets, so that there's perfect competition in all input and output markets. And part of that is that firms have perfect knowledge on production technologies and input prices, so the firms know everything. So in this model, we assume that firms know everything about all the technologies they could possibly use and all the possible input prices that are possible. Now, part of that is just shut off. I wonder what that means. You notice oh, that's why it shut off. It's time for us to go. Which means we'll start over with this on Monday. And for those of you who don't know, we will, happily or not, I will be here on Monday, and I hope to see you as well. So you have the assignment that's due on Monday, and I'm going to give you another assignment, one last assignment for, you look so unhappy about that. One last assignment that will be due next Thursday. So to close out the semester, now next Thursday, I will be talking about the final exam. So that's to encourage you to come for the last class. I will be talking about that. Now, before everyone goes, I would like to see what everyone's schedule is in terms of your finals, when you would. One of the things that I like to do is have the final exam after people take most of their finals, so that you can focus on this. And you don't have to study for this, and I know you're looking forward to that very much. Now, when is people's your main final week? Is that the week next week? I'm sorry, the week after next?
Main.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. So the week of the
Peak.
No, let's see, next week is the 27th. What is it, the week of the 1st? August 1st, that week. Now, I was thinking of doing it the week after. Is that okay for people? Are people leaving? Some of you might be leaving. Is anybody going on holiday or leaving for abroad? Some people leave abroad early. And we've gone a little bit later this semester than normal. So I'm thinking about doing that the week. It might be like the Friday, maybe the weekend. That weekend. Let me know what your schedules are. So if you can, we don't have to decide until next week. But what I want to do is make sure that you're getting. There's two things. One, I prefer to not have it when you're, because the way that you have to study for many of your finals is different from this. So I think it's just to be fair in both ways. I like to separate that. And the second, to the degree that that's true. And the second thing is some of you might be leaving early. So if you are, let me know, and we'll have to work around that. So now some of you are leaving for abroad. When are you leaving? When are your departure?
14th.
The 14th, so you're okay. So you're going, okay. Where are you guys going? To Florida. It's hot in Florida, at least I think. Of course, it'd be the same as here, basically. I think I've never been to Florida. But I know what it's like in tropical places anyway. No,
Yeah, tropical.
Yeah, it's tropical.
月曜日っていうのは何だ？
The
月
part
曜
of
日で
Caribbean.
この1個出すじゃん。で、今日もう一回宿題が出て
そう
土曜ぐらいに
The face, so
今日明日に出るやつは来週の木曜日に出る。で、月曜日に出るのは
もう出てる。
月曜日には多分もう出ないんだと思う。最後は
月曜日出すの
宿題はもう出てる。
ない。月曜日に出すのはあるけど、月曜日に宿題は出ない。月曜日に出す宿題はない。
23から24
ああ、させてください。
Right. We're meeting here at this same time on Monday.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So don't forget, we've got an exciting lecture in general equilibrium coming
今
up.
週出たので最後だね。これで最後。
That would be on the exam, right?
Probably because
Because important concept.
well, it's an important concept. Yeah.
General equilibrium.
Yes.
Today's assignment is less than usual. No, usual size.
I think he's negotiating. It's the last one.
Next
It's
week.
the last one.
Next
Yeah, I
week.
got
Usually people have a luggage test.
Next